Hey, welcome back. This is our default game engine tutorial series associated with building a tower defense game. This is the very last tutorial in that series. Hey, thanks for all you guys who have stuck it out and gotten to this point. I hope you have found it very helpful. Again, my name is David Chadwick. I'm here with Tactics Studios, and we're building this because I got to tell you, I really think the default engine is really the best in the industry for 2D based games. And I hope that this tutorial has kind of driven home the power of that game engine. In this last tutorial, we're going to focus on two really key parts to kind of wrap up this game. The first is you always want the ability, particularly in a strategy type game like this, to stop the action. You want to put a pause on it so you can make some decisions of whether you want to upgrade a tower, you want to repair a tower, you want to get rid of a tower, whatever the case may be. And you don't want a lot of other activity taking place at the same time. So you want to be able to pause the game and then click another button and have it continue on. So we're going to address how to do that. Secondly, you want to balance the game. You want to make sure the game isn't too hard. You want to make sure that it's not overly simplistic. So we're going to go through what are the parameters that give you the flexibility for doing that sort of thing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and kick off. But before I do, down in the description here on YouTube, you're going to see that there's a Google Drive and there's a URL for that there. I'd really encourage you to go ahead and download the full default project associated with this last build number 6 and then load it up on your machine. And I think you might find it helpful to run that in parallel with listening to the tutorial, because that way you can kind of take a look at what I'm showing you and then tweak it a little bit on your own. So let's go ahead and kick off. Here we go. As I mentioned in the opener, this is the last step on the tower defense tutorial series. So at this point, when we're done with this particular video right here, we're going to have a fully functional tower defense game that candidly has all of the features that you're going to find on essentially 99% of the tower defense games you find on the market today. There's a couple out there, ones that charge a lot of money, unfortunately, that might have a little bit more complexity associated with them, but I think this captures the real essence of what tower defense is all about. So we are now in that last 6th step. That's where we are. Let's go ahead and do it. I think it's always good to take a look at, so what is the end product of this going to look like? I keep talking about we're going to have the ability to pause and continue. What does that really mean? So let's go ahead and take a look. I'm just going to take a quick extract from the game. You can see in this particular case, there's a tank moving across on one of its strike paths, and I'm going to go ahead and click the pause button. And you see everything comes to a complete stop. And when I click it again, everything continues exactly where it was. Now you'll notice though on that node that I'm clicking, let me do it again. When I click it, you see that it changes from basically those two parallel pause symbols to a continuation button. So that means that when I click it again, it's going to continue gameplay. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, now you can see that now we're going to have some exchange of fires between a tower and a tank. And when I pause doing that, you can see what really happens is it stops the animations as well. It stops all the bullets that are flying. It stops the explosions. It stops any of the floating icons that are going back up either the health or resources. So it really stops all game action. So in this tutorial, we're going to show you the design mechanics that Default uses for actually accomplishing that pause. Okay, we're going to kick off with the segment 1. Segment 1 is really where we're going to add the pause, game pause functionality to our game. And we're really going to focus on two key concepts. The first is the use of a collection proxy component. Collection proxy component. We're going to name it game proxy, and that's the mechanism that allows your Bootstrap collection to load up a different collection into memory and initiate the various components and containers within that collection. That's very important because that, by having a game proxy, allows us to invoke a message ID of set time step. And that allows us to change the DT, the delta in time, from 0, time has stopped, to 1, time is in sync with normal time. That's the key. Let's show how to do that. Let's start with our overall project structure, because that's going to be one of the key drivers here. Up to this point, all of our builds for the tower defense game have included the entire set of game objects within a single main.collection. Just to refresh, here's the structure we ended up with at the end of build 5. And the main collection is identified within the game.project file as the bootstrap collection. That means that when the game starts, it's going to load all the components for that main.collection, and it's going to execute the code contained within the init functions of each of the script files within each of the containers, each of the components identified within the main.collection. But for this last tutorial in the Tower Defense series, we're going to add a different bootstrap collection, a tower game collection. And this tower game collection is going to contain a collection proxy component. Okay. Why? Well, I think we all know that within the game.project file, we identify what's designated as a, quote, bootstrap collection. That's where all the game objects within the bootstrap collection get loaded into memory when your game begins execution. A new feature that we now want to use is called the collection proxy component. This component is used to reference a different collection that isn't the bootstrap collection. Just to demonstrate using a simple animation. Within a script contained within the bootstrap collection, you can send a message to the collection proxy to load another collection into memory. Let's call this the level collection. That message is addressed to the URL of the collection proxy, instructing it to load the collection that is identified in that proxy. And when received, the level collection is loaded and a reply message is sent back to the sender being the same component within the bootstrap collection initially sent the load. That is, the level collection is now loaded and is functioning. Because Default uses the concept of a collection proxy as the means for a game application to have multiple collections, but not needing to load all of them in order to effect messaging between them. And the collection proxy is the component that you can send messages to enable the loading, the enabling, the disabling, and such of all the components within each of those collections. I'm sure at this point you're probably asking, so why do we need to use a collection proxy? Hey, great question. That's because we want to use the default, quote, set time step message ID. That's going to be the mechanism that we use for pausing the game. Now we're going to jump into the details of set time step in a minute, but for now, just understand that you need that message ID, and it's got to be posted to a collection proxy if you want the ability to apply a scaling factor to the time step, to include setting the time step to a 0, that is, pausing the game. So let's go ahead now and let's walk through this concept in several steps that will build on each other. Well, starting at the top before we dive in, here's the project structure for build 6. This is how it's going to end here at the end of this tutorial. Hey, notice two things. The bootstrap in game.project is now tower game collection. And there's now two key collections, the tower game collection as well as the main.collection. Now let's go ahead into our deep dive into how this structure really supports our goal of pausing the game. As I just indicated, our game.project file references the tower_game collection as its bootstrap collection. That means that when the game starts, it loads all the components within the tower game collection into memory, and it executes the init functions within each of those scripts. You can see here the structure of tower game collection, which includes a game pause graphic user interface and a loader. The loader consists of a game proxy, basically a collection proxy named game proxy, and a loader.script. When the loader script file is executed, as you can see, the init posts a message to game proxy, which points to the main collection, telling it to load, at which time the main collection dynamically loads into memory and instantiates each of its components. Once fully loaded, it sends a proxy loaded message ID back to the script that sent the load message. That is, it sends it back to the loader script. The loader script then processes the proxy loaded message by sending back an enable message. In essence, starting the game contained within main.collection, the game we've been working on in the previous 5 tutorials. Wow, that seems like a lot of work just to reload a game we've already developed, doesn't it? Well, here's the real benefit. The set time step message ID. Now that we have a collection proxy for our main collection, we're now able to send a set time step message. So what will that do? Well, within our GamePause GUI script, we're now going to include two message post statements, one to pause a game and one to tell it to continue at normal speed. Pausing the game essentially is what's termed as a discrete mode, where we want to have a factor of 0. A factor of 0 means that DT, the time step, within each of our update functions is set to 0. What does that do? That stops all update functions and it stops all the animations. The game is now stopped. Here's the syntax from within the GamePause GUI script that posts that message, which sets the factor to 0, stopping the game, and the mode to 1. You can see we have a message post. You see we put in the full URL to the game proxy. We send the message ID of set time step, passing two parameters, factor equaling 0 and mode equaling 1. Let's invert that. Now we want to continue the game. If the factor is set to 1, that means that DT, the time step, is set back to normal. All the updates and all the animations now continue to run at normal speed. Now here's the syntax for that message posting, which sets the factor to 1 and the mode to 1. With that perhaps lengthy explanation of some of the default mechanics associated with both proxies and the set time step, I think we're now ready to walk through the specific extensions that have been made since the end of the tutorial for Build 5. We're first going to look at the changes made to the project structure, followed by changes that we've made to the script files. Here's our project structure for build number 6. We've already touched on several of these, but let's walk through the changes that have been made to extend Build 5 Foundation to the current Build 6 active project in order to support game pausing functionality. First, as we look in the game.project file, we can see that we've identified tower_game.collection as the bootstrap collection for this build. Opening that collection up, we see that it has a main game object which contains two components. A game pause game object, which is a container for the game pause graphic user interface, and a loader game object, which is the container for a game proxy and a loader script file. Okay, let's dive a little deeper into each of these. Let's take a look at the GamePause GUI. This graphic user interface is relatively simple. It consists of two nodes, pause and pause notice. As we can see, pause, which will be the node, the button that we press to both stop the game and continue the game, has a position of 980/726. Now I've set the scale to 0.6, and that kind of scales the graphic image that we're going to use pretty much to what we're looking to do. As we see, we've set the texture to the pause button that was located in the Pop-Up Assets Atlas. The pause notice is located in the center of the screen from my X position, 512, at a Y of 377, and I've set the scale to 0.7. And we've set the texture again within the Atlas Pop-Up Assets to game paused. This will be the notice that pops up that tells you whether the game is paused or whether the game's continued. You notice we only have the pop-up assets as a texture. We don't have any fonts. Everything in here is a graphic. We have a single layer, the notices layer. The second container within the Tower game collection is the loader game object. That contains a collection proxy component that we've named game proxy and a loader script. The game proxy references the collection folder tower_game main.collection. That's the collection that we've worked on within all the previous tower defense tutorials, so I've kept the name for that collection the same, at main. And the rest of the structure remains consistent with the framework we finalized at the end of Build 5. So with that, I think we're now ready to jump over to the script files to see how the game pause, game continue features have been implemented. Script file extensions. Well, first, hey, let's take a quick summary of what stays the same and what's been changed and what's new. Here's a quick summary right here. You can see that the majority of script files from our previous build No changes whatsoever. Stay exactly the same. There are three, however, there are going to be some changes in order to implement the game pause feature in our main menu GUI script, in our tower action script, and in the upgrade windows script. And then there's going to be two new scripts. We've already kind of talked about these when we went through the project structure. We're going to have a script for the loader, and we are going to have a new GUI script for our game pause graphic user interface. So given the comparison between build 5 and this current build 6, I'm going to take a shortcut here. I'm only going to show the changes that have been made to the main menu, the tower actions, and the upgrade window GUI script within that diff now window. I think you're going to see these are pretty minor changes, and I think it just keeps it pretty simple. Let's look at our main.GUI script first. Obviously, we do add some bullets to our header comments to summarize the new functionality associated with adding a notice node and including messages to both enable and disable that game pause button. We don't want our game control nodes to be showing when the level selection panel is being displayed. Therefore, within the reset level selection panel local function, we're going to disable that notice node at the same time as all the other control nodes within the main menu. Additionally, we want to send a message to the game pause graphic user interface using a message ID of disable pause. Within our onMessage function, when the main menu processes the disable control node message ID, we've added sending a message to the game pause graphic user interface to also disable the pause node at the same time. Also, when processing that enable control node's message ID, a message is sent to the game pause to enable the pause node. We have a new message ID that's being processed, cancel notice. When received, the main menu GUI script is going to disable the notice node. Pretty simple. Pretty logical changes, don't you think? Let's move on to tower action script. Quick reminder, we've got our build 5 on the left and our build 6, the current build for game pause, on the right. You can see that we have made a quick update to our header comments simply to highlight the fact that we're supporting game pause functionality here. And then our next change is down in our onMessage function. And this is associated when the tower is clicked after it's already been deployed to one of its defensive positions. So when that happens, we now want to add several actions. We want to pause the gameplay during that tower upgrade process. Remember, when you click a tower that's already been deployed, you're going to pop up that upgrade window, and we want to stop gameplay when that happens. So we're going to do this by sending a message to the game proxy, citing the set time step message ID that we talked about earlier here in this tutorial. Just what we discussed. Then we're going to disable the pause button so that we don't have any double pause actions. We don't want to do this twice. Sending a message to the game pause graphic user interface to disable the pause button. And we're going to hide any ongoing notices so that when we send the message to the main menu graphic user interface to cancel the notices. That way we don't have one notice laying on top of a different notice. Our next change is associated with clicking a deployed tower when that tower already has the upgrade, repair, sell pop-up active. In other words, we want to disable it and get back to gameplay. So in order to do that, we post a message to the game proxy, establishing the set time step with a factor of 1 and a mode of 1. And then we also enable the pause button and send a message to continue the game. Lastly, when a player takes action to change a tower, either upgrade it or repair it, we want to pause the game. We're going to do that by sending the enable pause message ID to the game pause graphic user interface. And our last change script file is the upgrade pop-up GUI script. Let's walk through it real quick. Again, the new build 6 is on the right-hand side. So you can see that in this last build, I've added a new script property that's the self.tower version. I've done this to avoid contention with the current tower type that's used when processing an upgrade. And you'll see these changes here in just a minute. In terms of the changes to our code, there's just a few in addition to adding a couple quick bullets here in the header. When processing the Show Upgrade pop-up window message ID, we set the new script property, tower version, to the message tower version that was passed to this script as a parameter. Once the tower selects a tower repair action, a set time step is going to be sent to the game proxy with a factor of 1 so that the game continues. Similarly, if a player selects a tower upgrade action, a set time step with a factor of 1 is going to be sent to the game proxy, again, so that the game continues once that player has made that selection. And here's where we close with no action, and I've moved all the functionality down to this one point just to clean up the code a little bit. Okay, almost there. Let's talk about our two new scripts that we're adding in this particular build. The first is our loader script. We saw this script earlier in the tutorial when we were describing the concept of a collection proxy, and here it is again. When the game's initialized, the init function sends a load message ID to the game proxy, which references our main.collection. At that point, it loads the main collection, and when it is finally loaded, it sends back the proxy loaded message ID, which this loader script processes by sending an enable message back to it, which therefore starts the full game logic contained within main collection. And for our second new script, we're going to focus on the game pause GUI script. Again, we reviewed the node structure for the game pause graphic user interface earlier, so let's quickly walk through this GUI script file that controls the actions associated with each of those nodes. There's two local functions. Pause game. That uses the GUI play flipbook to set the pause node to a continue button image. It enables the node, and it sends a set time step message ID to the game proxy with a factor of 0. That means that the DT is set to 0, which stops the game, basically pausing the game. A flag, self.paused, is set to true, and that is used to capture any duplicate clicking of the button. And finally, a message is sent to the main menu graphic user interface to cancel any ongoing notices. The second local function is continue game. The functionality is very similar, except in this case it sends a factor of 1 with a set time step, and that continues the game. Within init, during initialization, the flag script property self.pause is initialized to false, and the two nodes, pause and pause notice, are captured and disabled. Within onInput, when a player releases the pause node, if the self-paused is true, in other words, the game is already paused, then it invokes the continue game function. Else, it invokes the pause game function. And lastly, there's a few message IDs that are processed within the onMessage function. Enable pause, which enables the pause node. Disable pause, that disables the pause node as well as the pause notice. Pause game, that calls the pause game local function. And continue game, which calls the continue game local function. I hope that all makes some sense. Hey, basically, this build is invoking the set time step message ID, which required us to declare a collection proxy, the game proxy, in order to use that capability. Okay, now let's move on to segment 2. Segment 2 is associated with balancing the game. You know, it's a pretty important concept. You don't want to scare your players. So you really like an introductory level where it's fairly easy. You go by the numbers and they get a victory and you kind of hook them in a little bit. And then each level gets a little bit more difficult. So there's a number of parameters associated with this genre that we can tweak a little bit to make things a little simpler, a little harder. So in this segment right now, we're just going to walk through each of those parameters to show you in pinpoint exactly what you have the means to relatively easily change. So here's your challenge. Everybody thinks about how the right balance between complexity and playability should be found. So I'm going to walk through all the parameters that are inside the game that you get to modify as you deem appropriate. And then we're going to see how easy or how difficult you're going to make it for your player to win a scenario or a level. So let's go ahead and walk through each of them now. I'm going to do that by script. Within the controller script, we have several. Tower strength points. That's the inherent strength of a tower, and it's a table with strengths increasing for each of the 3 different tower types. We have tower cost. That's the cost and resource points that the player must expend to deploy a tower. Again, it's a table with cost increasing for each of the 3 different tower types. Tower loss. Another table which contains the number of health points a player will lose if one of his towers is destroyed, where the elements of the table are for each of the 3 different tower types. Tank strength. That's a table containing the strength for each tank type. Tank gain. A table with the number of resource points the player will gain if the player destroys a tank by type. Starting resources. That's the number of resource points the player has at the beginning of each level. And starting health points is the number of health points the player has at the beginning of each level. Number of tanks. Again, a table which contains the number of tanks per strike by level, where each strike in each level can have a different number of tanks. And lastly, within the controller script, we have the time between tanks. That's the number of seconds between the spawning of each individual tank within a strike. And that, of course, drives the distance between those tanks as they move along their path towards the enemy objective. Lots of opportunity there to tweak strength versus numbers of resource points gained or lost. Upgrade pop-up GUI script. This is where we're computing the various impacts of upgrading or repairing. So I have a sell factor, which is a multiplicative factor applied to tower costs when calculating the sell price, the amount you'll gain by selling a tower. Repair factor, another multiplicative factor that's applied to tower costs when calculating the repair price. Similarly, we have upgrade factor, which is a multiplicative applied to the tower costs in calculating the upgrade price. Hey, the bottom line, the higher these factors, the more expensive it will be for the player to upgrade or repair a tower. Tower action script. Bullet delay. That's a table that contains the delay in seconds between bullets fired by the tower by bullet type. A smaller entry means bullets are fired more rapidly. Bullet action script. Max speed. That's a table that provides the speed of the bullet for each type of bullet. Higher the type, the faster the bullet. Bullet strength. Another table provides the strength of the bullet for each type. Higher the type, the more strength the bullet has. Other parameters. There's a lot of other things that could be tweaked. We have the geometries associated with the locations where a player can deploy a tower, as well as paths and the geometries associated with them that enemy tanks move along that can be adjusted as well. Defensive positions. This table provides the X and Y positions for each of the defensive positions by game level. You can have more positions or less or different locations. Strike paths. These tables provide the waypoints, X and Y, for each strike path for each level. And again, you can make those paths as simple or as complicated as you think. You have a lot of flexibility here in how to make a scenario either much easier or extremely difficult for the player. So go ahead and adjust all of these as you see fit to see what impact it has on your gameplay. Not only are we in the last video, we're now in the last segment. Let's wrap this up. No really new material here. I just thought it'd be helpful to take a little step back. Let's take a look at what we've learned how to do using the default game engine. What are the mechanics that allow us to accomplish several things? Let's go through my little laundry list here. We have geometry-based movement. We've identified the X and Y parameters to allow our tanks to move along various paths, movement between waypoints, rotation of the game object to reflect the direction of travel. That's a pretty useful tool. We have geometry-based loiter positions where we have some static locations, in this case for our towers, that we can use our drag and drop capabilities on to pick up a game object from one location and move it to another location, and checking whether that's been preoccupied or not, and various game logic associated to it if it is. We have a whole host of game parameters, data parameters, variables, both global and local, that control the overall balance of the game. Everything from strength to resource base to geometry based. And so we have the ability to really modify the game to make it either very easy or not so easy. We have a series of various graphic user interfaces. We have the major interface for selection of our levels. We've got a pop-up that provides help or initial information associated with the game. We've got a pop-up that takes a look at whether we want to upgrade or repair or sell a particular game object. And lastly, we have a different graphic user interface associated with our pausing and our continuation of the game. We've included fire exchange at various types, at various speeds, and the impact associated with that fire exchange on game objects, both friendly and not so friendly. And lastly, we have our game pause and game continue feature. So that's a pretty rich set of capabilities. I think you're going to find that not just for tower defense, but you can apply those to various genres that you may want to build your game associated with. Well, that about wraps it up. We've now completed our tower defense series. I hope you have found it helpful. I have to tell you, I've enjoyed putting it together. It's taken me a little longer than I really expected it to or wanted it to, but hopefully it's worth that investment in time. I would really appreciate any feedback you can provide here on YouTube. Those comments come straight to me. So if you have any recommendations, any comments about what you like or don't like about the course, or any information you think I need so I can make it better, I'd certainly greatly appreciate that. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe. I appreciate the subscription counts, and obviously that's important to all of us. I urge you again, if you haven't yet, there's a Google Drive URL here in the description on YouTube. Please download the project. I think that's the best way to jump in the trench and really learn how to apply Defold to the type of game you wanted to develop. There's a lot of intricacies here, and I think that allows you to do that. Before I sign off, real quick, a little forecast. I've already started work on a next tutorial series. That'll be associated with building a role-playing game, an RPG. That I think includes all of the various features that you find in that genre in the market today. So it's going to take me a little bit more to get that out there, but I think once out, I think you'll enjoy that one too. Okay, thanks again. Please enjoy your Defold engine, and I look forward to your comments. Take care now. Bye.